And greetings. Welcome to a special evergreen edition of the Steve Deace Show. I'm Steve Deace. He is Todd Erzin. He is Aaron McIntyre. And we are very excited about what you are about to listen to here for the next 2 hours. And we have loved each and every one of the long-form conversations that we have done with these evergreens. And as we always tell you, we have no idea what future date this will air. We are recording this actually on June the 26th, all right, of 2024. I don't even know that it will air this year, but at some future date, when it is providentially perfect, at least that's what we're hoping anyway, you will get to hear this episode at the ideal time. And this will be maybe the most unique evergreen we've ever done, maybe among the most unique episodes we have ever done. But before we continue on, don't forget the end of this month is the expiration for your opportunity to win a free Jace case for every year for the rest of your life from our friends at Jace Medical. It's no obligation, no purchase necessary to enter at jace.com/Deace, J-A-S-E. Jace.com/Deace is where you can go to enter between now and before August 31st. And also, that's also where you can get your Jace case as well to make sure you've got a backup of the medications you need. You can expand it and customize it now, even beyond the great medications that were in the original. And you get a discount when you use the promo code DACE as well at jace.com/Deace, J-A-S-E, jace.com/Deace. Use the promo code DACE at checkout for a discount on your order at jace.com/Deace. Also, enter that contest for free right there before August 31. When you think about the intersectionality between Christianity, at least of a small o orthodox nature, and the paranormal, you often think as if there's not much of an intersectionality there. These are parallel streams of thought and belief, and they don't necessarily intersect. And if they do, somebody went off script called the Bible. But then you may come from a tradition, maybe you're like Todd, you're Catholic, and you have exorcisms, and you're like, yeah, I mean, we don't sit around at Mass telling ghost stories, but there's at least some theological recognition in our tradition that these phenomena exist and require some form of confrontation from the Almighty or explanation, right?
Oh, any Catholic should happily embrace what you just said, yeah.
All right. Then on the evangelical side, I mean, if you're going to like Berean First Assembly, okay, and and Apostle John Smith is your head pastor with his wife, First Lady Beth, yeah, again, you're probably not telling ghost stories, probably not discussing black-eyed children or Skinwalker Ranch from the pulpit most Sundays, but yeah, you're open to the idea that, again, these things may exist. This kind of phenomena is out there and requires some level of righteous, Holy Spirit-driven response. But even within those traditions, this would be rare. Now imagine that you're a Reformed Christian, and I mean like Douglas Wilson Reformed. All right? That kind of Reformed. Like Moscow mood Reformed. And you're living in Utah, which means already you are odd. And already you are used to being out of place. And you decide, you know what? Let's start a podcast where we talk in our just released episode about dragons. This has not only happened, but this podcast has taken on a life of its own. It has become immensely popular. I first heard about it earlier this year, courtesy of you, Aaron, and your recommendation. And you were like, brother, this is right up your alley. You have to hear this. Yeah. And I was hooked from the very first episode. First of all, the production value in and of itself is very high. But the ability to somehow attempt anyway to bring theological precision to an area where a lot of people think either there's not a lot of theology happening or it's very murky, I also find to be intellectually fascinating on top of the production value. As I've said for years, when we create Christian content, the goal should first of all be to create excellent content. that just turns out to be made by Christians and infused with Christianity. And this particular podcast does that. And it is called Haunted Cosmos. And if you are not tuned into this, you are missing out. It is phenomenal. The two men behind it join us today for this evergreen. Ben Garrett and Brian Sauvé are here. Make sure I got that right the second time. And I didn't write it out ahead of time because we don't script anything. But guys, I tried to give you a miniature version of your own cold open, as you guys do with your own episodes there, just to provide a little story backdrop to set the mood. How did I do?
Oh, that was great, Steve.
I'm flattered.
We thought you nailed, you really nailed the heart of the project, and not only trying to do just media well, whether it's, not every Christian podcast has to be a podcast about theology and doctrine, but really to come into an area with the light of truth where there's not only a lot of just fascinating stories and topics to discuss, but even a huge window that we've found for apologetics and to just answer the exploding popularity of a lot of these subjects. And so, yeah, we're honored to be here. And that was a really apt description, I think.
Yeah, that was a great intro. Thank you. That was really humbling. And yeah, I mean, we always say Christians should be the most interested people in the world. We should be interested in everything. And we certainly noticed a gap in the church's interest. And so we thought, hey, we're a couple of schmucks that are interested in it. We may as well go for it.
Let's do what everybody does. Let's start a podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
So before we get into the subject matter and the theology and everything behind the show, let's discuss right off the top the craftsmanship. Because I do think the last few years, and when we went down the path of making our movie Nefarious based on my book, A Nefarious Plot, I literally put in my contract, no cheesy conversion scene. Can't happen.
Love it.
Whatever MacGuffin we came up with to take this 230-page polemic of a demon dunking on you, all right, and turn it into a film. Whatever MacGuffin we created in order to translate that character into a motion picture could not include some scene where someone is at their perceived lowest, okay, and they walk out from their back porch on a sunny day and come to We're not doing that. Okay, we're not doing that. And I think it worked for our film to not do that, but we're more and more seeing within the Christian realm, we're figuring out that somewhere between glorifying sin and being cheesy, that we can be gritty, that there is a realism, that we can ground it in the reality of the world in which we live and depict sin and confront it as a storytelling device without actually glorifying it. And I think you've seen from Sound of Freedom to Jesus Revolution to Unplanned, you've seen the quality of Christian film storytelling clearly has leveled up within the last 3 to 4 or 5 years. I think what you guys are doing is you've done this in the podcasting realm. I mean, the quality of the editing, just as I'll just say this as a broadcaster, even if I wasn't a believer, I would find this very highly produced and effective just in terms of the way it is structured. It's engaging, the chemistry between the two of you, which at times frankly scares me. And let me be the next person to request you stop talking about how cute you think the other guy is. Okay.
Handsome.
He's so handsome.
Yes. Yes, King. I know. Yes, but anyway,
so true.
But it is. It's just a high quality production. The theological orthodoxy is difficult enough, but making it a quality production, I know from my own experience, is not easy. And you guys stick the landing on this, and so I wanted to make sure we just noted that right from the beginning.
Man, well, thank you. That is something that when we started New Christendom Press, our more broad media company, it was one of the things from the very beginning we said as we entered into this podcasting space was people think there's no room for another podcast, and what they're actually experiencing is that there's no room for another podcast that doesn't respect the listener enough. That from the first moment they begin to listen till when the show ends, that you've respected their time and you've done everything within your power and skill to draw them in and tell a good story, tell truth, but also tell truth engagingly and well, and surround it with beauty. And so we've definitely tried to do that, and it is very encouraging to hear from someone like you you're doing this on a way bigger scale than we are. So thank you for noticing that. We appreciate it.
You bet. You're welcome. And I don't know. I've seen you guys' podcast ranking increase. You guys are catching up, and deservedly so. I think it's just beyond interesting and intriguing and just a fun listen. But where does the idea for this come from, right? Like, you know, I at least, when I delved into this arena with a nefarious plot, I at least had Clyde Staples Lewis's screw tape letters to essentially, that was my predicate. My intent was to basically write a sequel of that book, because, you know, I'd written one book, so now I'm qualified to write Lewis sequels. Okay,
that's great. No.
But well, you know, Obama was writing memoirs at 35, so here we are. But anyway, we are. But my intent was, you know, like in any sequel, you know, the rules of a sequel is the threat's got to be bigger than the original, right? And so Lewis is writing about, you know, letting us see from the hidden realm inside out, the unseen realm, what it's like, the tempting of us as individuals. So I was like, how about the taking down of an entire culture? I at least had, that wasn't a new idea. So when I approach a publisher or other Christian leaders I know that I want to get endorsements from or the approval of the book, there's a precedent that's very well known and respected for me to draw from, because they're like a book written by a demo. I say, you know, it's like a screw tape letters. Oh, okay, then it's okay, right? So you guys walk in. I mean, you guys got the beard, you got the mustache. All right, I would imagine someone grinded their own, beer. Okay, you got the full reformed uniform on, right? And you guys go back to your home subculture. And you're like, all right, guys, you ready for this? Aliens.
Aliens.
What do you think? Huh? And we're going to take it like seriously. What was the reaction just within your own tribe to the idea of launching this?
You know, we do get quite a bit of misunderstanding. I think we really a dual response. One is just, thank you so much. We love this show. These are things that I've been either interested in or frankly wondering about, with the explosion of extraterrestrial UFO phenomenon, the supernatural in general, with ghost hunting shows and Travel Channel type stuff, with the explosion of witchcraft, modern witchcraft coming back.
Stories like Skinwalker Ranch.
Yeah.
People are like, what's going on?
What is this?
It's entertaining. What's going on?
I'm a Christian. I want to believe what's true, but I also, I want to have an answer for this. So we've had people who are very thankful for it. We've also had people who have, I think, fallen into the ditch of mistaking something you pointed out earlier, Steve, that you can tell a story of darkness really well with the craft turned up to 11, as best as you have in your strength to produce. And you're not, in telling that story well, making the blacks look black and the darks look dark. You're not actually saying, yay, demons.
Right.
Yay, Satan. When Tolkien's told the story of Helm's Deep and made you fear the orcs crashing on the walls and the women huddled in the caves, and when he made you feel that, Tolkien wasn't sinning. He wasn't on the side of Saruman and the orcs. Yeah. So we've had that response as well of like, you shouldn't be telling these stories. These things are dangerous. You can get cooties. And there certainly is a danger in discussing the demonic. But one of the dangers is also not to know your enemy and not to be equipped to answer his schemes.
Right. Yeah. To answer your question directly, some of the first reaction wasn't no because it is dangerous, but no because who would want that?
That's true.
The reaction.
I mean, Hollywood only produces literally 30 horror movies a year. No one wants this content, guys. No one does. Yes. Yeah.
And I don't want that content, but this content is like, there's so many of these 14 high strangeness podcasts already. Mm-hmm. And so part of the reaction was, seriously, why you and why this? This doesn't make any sense. But I think that the reason why it's good and the reason why it's not just admissible but good is because we are Christians. And so when we read the Bible, we see that there's something going on merely than just what's in front of us, that we can touch and feel and smell and hear and all this stuff. There's always something more. There's this other layer to the tapestry of creation that's always being tugged on.
Yeah.
And so when we come into the modern world and we think that all these things are new, but they're really not, they're just named different things now. Instead of an apparition, it's a ghost. And instead of like, the beast of Dejuma or whatever.
Gévaudan.
I got it. It was so close. It's Bigfoot, all these different things. And we come in and we say, maybe those people just weren't stupid. Maybe they were just also Christians living in the world that God made, trying to make sense of all the different cast of characters that he's put in. And the Bible nowhere claims to say that it's a taxonomy of every single thing in creation. Mm-hmm. But it does say that there are parts of creation that we're less privy to, but that we still are a part of. And so we should try to investigate those things. And I think that looking into the things unseen is a good way to start addressing that.
In other words, maybe this guy Patrick really did drive the snakes out of Ireland. Is that kind of what I hear you saying? Maybe that actually did occur.
Yeah.
Not even maybe.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Ben's like, it's confirmed. Yeah, maybe when we tend to look through history through our current lens, I mean, what Lewis talked about is chronological snobbery, that we tend to just basically import all of our baseline assumptions and presuppositions and assume that they're true without investigation, without confirming or arguing for them, and then sifting the past through the lens of those presuppositions. And when you do that with a modern materialist lens, materialism as not like I love stuff too much, but the belief that the world is just stuff, that it's just floating around atoms and quarks and molecules, and there's no supernatural beyond the natural. If you assume that and then you look back through the past, what option do you have but to say that every story of possession, that every story of gods coming down and interacting with man, or every story of some kind of seemingly preternatural creature wreaking havoc on a village, you have to say, oh, those old peasants, those illiterate peasants, they still thought that the earth was at the center of the universe. Mm-hmm. And, and they still thought the earth was flat, even though most of them actually from ancient times had calculated the circumference of the earth already, But we tend to do that with materialism. And one of the things we're aiming to push back on is say, as this subject explodes in popularity, a lot of non-Christians are saying, wow, what if there is such thing as a paranormal world? And Christians have shrunk back. And what we think instead is we should be charging in and saying, yes, there is a supernatural world. I'm a Christian. Let me tell you about the nature of this supernatural world. Let me see you protected, inoculated with truth against the schemes and deceits of real, ancient, undying, malevolent, supernatural beings who are bent on your destruction, who hate God, and so hate him everywhere they see him, especially in the face of man, his image bearer. So we should expect in a supernatural world like the Bible describes for these supernatural beings to be attempting to take people captive. And they're doing it very successfully right now in the paranormal media realm. So we were convinced, even if Christians, maybe they won't get it right away, let's try to show them how a Christian might be interested in this topic, but not interested in it in an unhealthy way or in a way that would cede truth to that interest, if that makes sense.
Yeah, in terms of a witness, like an evangelistic opportunity, I do want the non-Christian to realize that when they feel hatred towards the cynical, materialist atheists in the world, they're right. Their view is bankrupt. Yeah. The materialism is just, it can offer you nothing. There's nothing true about it. I want them to know that they're right to feel that way. And then I want them to know what to do about it. And so it's sort of drawing people in to show them, no, actually, there really is something here. And here's what you should think about it. And then for a Christian witness, to existing believers, the light bulb that can go off in someone's mind when you present them with a copy of Homer's Iliad and you say something like, this is myth and it's also history. This is something that probably happened. There's nothing in the Bible that precludes the Iliad just happening, being real, being oral tradition that's passed down of something real.
Yeah, history warped through mythology.
Exactly. And the light bulb that goes off in people's minds when they're already Christians and they hear you say that, it wakes people up to appreciating this theater of God's glory in creation more. And I think that's good. Because the other thing that materialism does is it makes Christians balk at the materialism and they sort of retreat into this just like, I can only appreciate God. And I can't appreciate anything that God made. I can't say that that mountain is good or that it reflects something true. And that's just not how the Bible talks. The Bible constantly is talking about things in the world to help us realize the glory and the beauty of the one that made it. And so, especially in the Reformed tradition and the Protestant tradition, I want to reclaim that.
That is very well said. But before we continue with that conversation, don't forget about our friends at Patriot Mobile. If you're an American tired and frustrated by what's happening in the country and wishing you didn't always have to give your money to people who hate you, you're probably a lot of people in this audience. Now, unfortunately, the parallel economy is not 100% available to us, but one place where it is 100% available is with a product pretty much 100% of Americans need nowadays. That's our mobile phones. Make the switch today to our friends at Patriot Mobile. They've got an outstanding U.S.-based customer service team. I've seen for myself when I speak all over the country how often they reinvest right back into causes and values that we believe in. All right, and you get a free month of service today with my offer code DACE when you switch today at patriotmobile.com/Steve. patriotmobile.com/Steve. Use the offer code Steve. I think I said DACE earlier. It's Steve. For a free month of service, offer code Steve at patriotmobile.com/Steve. I mean, a couple things came to mind listening to you guys articulate that together. Number one, there's really not much difference outside of one still claims a link to the transcendent between a lot of today's what I like to call Pottery Barn, evangelical suburban megachurches who, self-edit the scriptures into what can be absorbed in a 22-minute sermon every week, and practice their own form of philosophical reductionism, because many of the same instincts to not sound weird, to not sound crazy. We're not cuckoo, okay? We don't act out, in the cringy ways that, that people are stereotypically opposed to Christianity. That's kind of the same intellectual snobbery of the materialist that you just described. And since that first group is what is foremost at the forefront of engaging American culture today, is this style of church and worship, that gets to my second point listening to you guys. It does seem kind of counterintuitive to say we're seeker-friendly and we represent a worldview whose origin, whose genesis is that a supernatural transcendent being reached his hand literally down into human history to take himself in human form, okay, who was dead, wrapped up in burial cloth, dead as a doornail after he'd been tortured beyond recognition and then dead, and rolled behind a 2-ton stone, and then supernaturally moved into history to remove that stone and raise himself literally back to life. And like a boss walk out of there like nothing happened. And then his apostles went out and did these like super miraculous acts with his spirit, like speaking other people's native languages in order to communicate his message to them. It does seem kind of counterintuitive to call yourself seeker-friendly, and your worldview begins with those supernatural claims. But by the way, this entire supernatural arena over here that more people are interested in America maybe than they have been since the Spiritism craze of the early 20th, late 19th and early 20th century, I've got nothing for that. We got nothing. But I do have this 22-minute sermon on how you can have a better manicured lawn. I've got that for you. Thoughts? It does seem a little counterintuitive, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's this great Mott and Bailey that the evangelical church pulls, where they're like welcoming everybody in. They're saying like, "Hey, we're cool. We're actually trying to appeal to the same audience that the materialist is trying to appeal to, which is just the broad audience of the world, the so-called enlightened people that walk the earth nowadays." And they're trying to draw them in and saying like, "We got great tips for your marriage, for your finances, for your job, for all these things." And then one of them says, "Well, what about the part where God becomes a man and he raises from the dead, dies, first of all, great point, and then like comes back to life again? What about that?" And they're like, "Oh yeah, we'll get there on Easter. We'll get there when we get, but really, I just want you to focus on how much we can help you with your finances and your marriage and your friendships." It's deception.
Well, it's the classic evangelical craving for respectability.
Yep.
And this is something that the scriptures warn us about. We shouldn't seek to be, our selling point shouldn't be, hey, we're respectable. And by that, we mean all of the ways that you validate intelligence and truthfulness.
Unoffensive is basically what respectable means nowadays. Yes.
Right. We're that. And instead, we should be front loading like the Lord and his apostles did, often front loading all of the reasons why you shouldn't follow me.
Yeah.
Hey, follow me. And do you want to be crucified? Because follow me. Do you want to die every day?
Do you want a bed to sleep in?
Don't follow me. Like,
yes,
I'm not your guy.
You know?
Yeah.
Do you want to? And in today's parlance, there's obviously always the self. We're crucifying the flesh with its passions and desires. But there's also an element today where a lot are institutional from the level of public education on up. We have an institutional materialism baked into our culture, where we've attempted in all of our higher education and public schooling to basically say, you are matter descended from other matter. You are an animal descended from animals. You come from nothing. You're going nowhere. By the way, there's no meaning in the universe other than that which you fabricate for yourself out of your own whims and intuitions. And it's infinitely, of course, that's infinitely malleable. You can be a man or a woman. You can be whatever you want to be. But ultimately, it's just this sort of reader response universe. You make up your own meaning. And Christians ought to be charging into that and saying, no. The universe was breathed out by a creator who had a purpose for every atom of it, including you. You exist for something. You're not an infinitely malleable lump of human clay that you get to be your own God. God actually has authority over you and demands your worship and obedience. But by the way, if you will worship him, you'll find that that's what you were for in the first place. And there'll be glory and joy. And so when it comes to the supernatural in particular, Christians should be front loading and saying, oh yeah, you live in a supernatural world. Mm-hmm. All those aliens things, don't fall for that, by the way. Those are the demons. All the ghosts, that's not grandpa.
That's not your grandma.
It's not grandma. That's a demon. And Christians should be charging in and just owning what the world would look at as totally not respectable. Because their worldview is actually bankrupt of respectability against the measure of real truth.
Yeah, I mean, our
100%.
church fathers were accused of being cannibals, sadistics, for practicing communion. He said to eat of his flesh, these are cannibals. They're polytheists. I mean, they were accused of all the unreasonable terms of that era. And we do everything in our era to run away from being seen as unreasonable with an unreasonable world as absolutely possible. I've got 1 minute before this first break, and so I'm going to ask a really difficult question to answer in 1 minute, okay? How do you make sure you guys stay on the narrow road while broadcasting such material? That's my struggle every day doing this.
Yeah.
Is I'm live from the narrow road, but the Blaze expects me to have a broad audience, okay? And so we discuss this as a staff all the time, that tension. But this subject matter, this exists existentially daily. How do you stay centered?
Two things. One is the proper ordering of your loves. You should love God more than Bigfoot. You should be more interested in the Lord than Bigfoot. You should be interested in Bigfoot, but not too much. So if you care more about, the haunted graveyard in your town than you do about your daily devotions and prayers, you're doing a really bad job of that first thing. So that's number one. Number two is Reformed confessionalism. Submitting yourself to the Reformed doctrinal work of your spiritual forefathers like the Westminster Assembly, reading the Westminster Confession of Faith. Anywhere you have exceptions, sure, you can note something and have a good reason for it. But overall, being able to say yes and amen to all of this. This is the tradition that I'm a part of. This is the history and the faith and the religion that I adhere to. That provides you with a fence of orthodoxy.
Yeah.
And within that fence, there's a rich field that you can graze in, like the good sheep that you are. And so when you have that fence and you start to graze in the field, you realize quickly that there's parts of the field where the grass has grown quite tall. And so you can safely enjoy those things so long as you're within this fence line of orthodoxy. And when you start to butt up against the fence, well, then it's time to, step back and reassess and maybe go the other direction for a while.
That is also very well said. You guys should start a podcast.
I've practiced that one before.
I think that if there's one thing we can conclude after this opening segment, you guys should consider a podcast. All right?
Thank you.
All right, we're going to come back with Ben Garrett and Brian Sauvé. They are co-host of the absolutely exploding in popularity Haunted Cosmos podcast. And we're going to get into some of this haunted stuff now when we return.
The Steve Deace Show.
All right, back here on this special evergreen edition of the Steve Deace Show here on BlazeTV Radio and Podcast. Speaking of podcasts, you definitely, if you're not already, want to listen to Haunted Cosmos. You can subscribe to it today. It is fantastic. And the two masterminds behind it, Garrett, I should say, and Brian Sauvé, they are here with us, and they do a fantastic job. You do not want to miss this at all. We got into their background, some of their theological traditions, and the challenge of navigating these supernatural realms without falling into the various pits, of either seeing Satan everywhere, as Lewis said, or then denying that he's anywhere, okay? And what does that look like to stay on the narrow road? But, hey, I mean, this real estate market is a Rubik's Cube, okay? Between soaring house values, soaring mortgage rates and mortgage payments, the lack of discretionary income, maybe now more than ever before, you need a real estate agent you can rely upon. I mean, already buying and selling a home is perhaps the biggest financial decision most of you in this audience is going to make in your entire lifetimes, let alone in these market conditions. So get someone you can trust. We wouldn't tell you that here at realestateagentsitrust.com if we hadn't verified and validated them first. That's how they get into our database. We check on them, and then we recommend them to you. So whether you want to get across country or across town, make sure you go into this uncertain market with a real estate agent you can trust. At realestateagentsitrust.com is where you can get started. A lot of times they're from in the same audience as you, so you share values in common as well. At realestateagentsitrust.com. Let me give you a little bit of my background now and why I found your podcast so interesting. Is I grew up pagan. I grew up like a lot of American kids in the 80s. My parents voted for Reagan, and we knew the Ten Commandments, so we thought we were Christians, okay? But, I mean, we barely see a need. My grandmother, God rest her soul, had a very late conversion to Christianity, but most of my childhood, she watched me a lot. My mom was 15 and literally growing up, and so my grandmother played a huge role early in my life as kind of a surrogate mom. She was heavily into the occult, heavily into horror and these sorts of things, and when my parents would go out and she'd babysit, I mean, she'd get me doped up on Archway sugar cookies, and we watched every horror movie you could imagine. To this day, I can remember Salem's Lot, the scene where the vampire comes up out of the kitchen floor in the miniseries. Yeah. Oh, I mean, I still think I'm 4-year-old Stevie in my underoos watching that. Okay, and so I inherited. I grew up with a huge interest in a lot of this stuff, and I studied a lot of it and read a lot about it, particularly because of the intellectual curiosity the Lord gave me, which I found out later was to do this show and not that stuff. Okay, but it has benefited me in communicating to a unbelieving audience who is into those things, and I've seen a lot of their films, and I do even try to keep up on the genre when it deals with spiritual themes. Even now, as a believer, I think you can tell a lot about a culture by what it's afraid of. Okay, and when I say afraid of, I don't care. I'm not talking about guys in hockey masks or Halloween, Michael Myers. I'm not talking about that kind of stuff. I'm talking about what supernaturally, viscerally gets a reaction from a culture. And early in my career, I was doing basically Christian movie reviews for WorldNet Daily, Washington Times, kind of a syndicated column. And on opening night, I went in to do a review of this movie that had this independent movie with this genre that, we had seen with the Blair Witch Project, but had disappeared for about a decade, called found footage. And the movie was called Paranormal Activity. And the advanced buzz on this was high. There was talk this was maybe going to be the biggest Hollywood opening for a horror film since The Omen or The Exorcist, that level of movie, The Shining. So I go to see it on opening night. And when I walked out of that film, first of all, it's very well done. But secondly, that was one of the first times as a believer that's growing in my faith now, and I'm a husband and a father, and I'm like, we are in a lot of trouble. And it's not because, this is like some exploitation film from the 70s, like Last House on the Left, where it's getting banned in countries. It's full of gore. It doesn't have really any of that. No nudity in the film. There is a cohabitating couple that's not married. There's a few profanities, but there's not the normal accoutrements of why you don't want your kids to see these movies, okay? It's the story. And because when I grew up and watched this stuff, even as a pagan kid, you knew at some point we were going to call the priest in here and get rid of this thing, and everything was going to be okay, right? That was the trope, right? At some point, some clergyman gets called in, all right, who understands supernaturally what we're dealing with here after the worldly authorities denied it for an hour and a half, all right, what we're really dealing with here. The last half hour, we finally go to the church and they rescue everybody, happy ending, evil's vanquished. And I kept waiting for that moment watching this film as this couple is haunted by a demon. And they go to the demonologist at the university. They Google it. They bring her father in because dad knows everything. Okay. And I keep waiting. Okay, cool. When are we going to call in the priest, right? It never happens. Not only that, it's never even mentioned. It's not like, well, nobody believes that hokey Christian stuff. It's like they created a universe where the only supernatural activity is dark. Mm-hmm. And when I walked out of there, and so of course, dark can't cast out dark, right? Beelzebub can't cast out Beelzebub. And so the end of the film, this was the first time I'd seen a film in this genre where the evil wins. The last scene of the film is the girlfriend showing she's completely given over to the darkness. That's the last shot. That's the last frame. And I walked out of there thinking, if we're at the point now, and this movie's 15 years old now, it came out in 2009, I think. If we're at the point now that we're now going to say the supernatural after denying it and embracing materialism, post, boomer deconstruction era, if we're going to go from, you know what, you guys, those old folks were right. There is a supernatural realm, but it's only dark and we're hopeless in it. And there's no light there to turn to. That's the worst of both worlds. We'd be better off being materialists. Okay, because you're going to open the door and the pathway to all forms of demonic evil and influence in your culture doing that. That was what I wrote at the time. That was 15 years ago at the time you and I, the three of us, are having this talk. And that was kind of one of the first moments as a Christian that's now applying my faith in the culture where I always go back to that movie, guys, as that was one of the first moments when I thought we might really, pardon the French here, we might really be screwed here. Okay. Your thoughts on that?
No, I think that is a very important point to understand in where we are. To understand how to live, one of the things you have to understand is where are you in the story? Where is your culture? Where are the background assumptions? And what happens is, culturally, Enlightenment forward, we basically said we're going to kill God. And Nietzsche, of course, when he understood that that's what we were doing, he despaired. He didn't celebrate like the new atheists of the 90s and early 2000s. He didn't celebrate. He despaired.
God is dead is a lamentation.
It's a lamentation. But we've, in many ways, successfully, for a while, pretended to be materialists and let's banish the God, let's banish all the spirits, let's banish everything. The problem is that just turns into a job opening. When you get rid of God, you don't actually get rid of God. That's just nature abhors a vacuum. You just create a job opening where some other God will rise ascendant. And in Enlightenment, rationalist, materialism, we had lots of different gods take the throne and wreak havoc. But what we're seeing now is actually something different. We're seeing materialism failing as a worldview, and more people waking up to this and saying, actually, no, that hypothesis that all that is are material things, that doesn't work. That's not true. There's a supernatural world. But instead of returning from their apostasy, the West's apostasy from Christ and Christianity, instead of that, we're going to all of the old gods. We're now seeing a return of ancient spiritual mysticism and occultism and all these other kinds. So the average person, I think, of the Zoomer and the millennial generation, a lot of them actually do believe in the paranormal, but they don't orient themselves to it Christianly. They don't understand the truth about it. So like you said, they've actually fallen into, on the one hand, either despair, where it's just darkness and that is ascendant and there's no real light of truth, or I think just as dangerous, and you see this in the ghost story phenomenon quite a bit, that people say, well, this sort of vague, general, happy, just do-goodism, where, yeah, there's an afterlife and there's a spiritual, and look at these near-death experiences, and I saw the ghost of my uncle right after he died, and he looked so happy, and that's, you can have heaven without Christ, on the other hand. And so I think it's really important that we understand this and see in our media and culture, what's the temperature check? Where are people's beliefs at? And they're not materialists.
Yeah, and the other thing is that man is homo adorans. Man is made to worship. We're made to venerate something. And so what that means is that we're really bad at coming up with our own telos. We are bad at telling ourselves what our own purpose is, what our end is. We need to venerate something that tells us the end of what we're for. And so we will do that.
Yeah.
We will get our telos from something else. It won't, maybe it's groupthink, or maybe it's a demonic spirit, but ideally it would be the living God, right? And so one of the things that happens when that vacuum is filled is that our proclivity to venerate gets itched, and so we venerate the thing. And if it's not God, if it's not the Lord, then it'll be a veneration that leads to our own destruction, because it's taking us towards a telos that leads to our own destruction. And so it's sort of like paranormal activity. I sort of see it as this phenomenon that I heard about one time as a kid. My philosophy teacher told me that if you were to take a newborn child and keep the child in a pitch black room for a year, there's no light at all, then you introduce the child to sunlight, he would be blind. He could never see again because it just didn't develop. He didn't know what to do with it. And the light would actually serve to further condemn his sight. I think of something like what you're describing, Steve, as a similar dynamic where the world blinded itself to the supernatural. It tried to pretend like it wasn't real. We tried to kill God. But we also tried to kill every other spiritual thing and say that it was all just atoms bumping together. And so we blinded ourselves for centuries. And then we wake up to the fact that that's just it's untenable. You can't believe that and function as a well-adjusted human being. And so we're reintroduced to the light again. But the light has served to condemn us. The light being the fact that there is a supernatural world. We don't know what to do with it. We're like a kid that's thrown into a swimming pool, having never learned how to swim. You could have a very good time. You could actually swim laps and it'd be great. It'd actually be good for you. But if you don't know what you're doing, if you don't know where you're headed, if you don't know what you're supposed to venerate and respect and honor, then you're just going to drown.
Yeah, especially
Excellent.
when the demons demand your worship.
Yeah.
Because that's what they do.
Exactly.
When you discover the fault,
Like,
what are they going to do? They're going to do what they did at every ancient ziggurat and pyramid in South America, Mesoamerica, and what they did in Egypt and what they did. They're going to say, worship me. And oh, by the way, I demand blood.
yes.
I demand sacrifice. It's all just going to be a perverse inversion of the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ, his body and blood shed for us.
And in return, I'll give you a good crop yield.
Yeah,
I'll give
right.
you more. The thing is, they're
Same
not
thing.
they're not stupid.
Yeah.
They know that man is supposed to venerate, so they require veneration. In return for the veneration, they actually do give gifts that seem very good, but they're not giving you the proper telos. You don't know that where you're headed is actually just perdition.
After my conversion, I had a listener in my audience send me, back then they were cassette tapes. Those had been the early 2000s, and sent me some cassette tapes from this guy in Moscow, Idaho, I'd never heard of, named Doug Wilson. And I mean, the first few years after I got saved, man, I was like Paul in Arabia. I'm like studying everything. I'm doing everything. I'm watching like every show on Christian television, many of which I still regret to this day. And, but I mean, I'm trying to figure out what's true, what's church history, what, all these tradition denominations, I mean, how do I make sense of it all? And I'm trying to, I kind of just feel a conviction, like I need to know as much about this faith that's going to maybe guide me the rest of my life as I do, frankly, about Michigan football seasons that took place before I was even born, And so I dive in head first, and I'm listening to all of Doug's tapes, and they were, hugely influential with me. And I bring this up because I don't necessarily come out of a theological background with a lot of the places where I settled, I thought the scriptures resided on, into using the kinds of language I'm about to use. But it's a result of understanding, I think, the signs of the times. When I started doing this show in 2006, if you would have told me I'd use the word demonic casually, nonchalantly, as part of my everyday parlance in describing and breaking down news events and items and political, disputes, I'd have told you were nuts. I'd have given you what you're talking about, Willis. Look, but here we are. And I would love to get you guys' take on this. An observation that I've made on this show is that the difference between sin and demonic is that when human sin is driving the degradation of a culture, that is the exploitation of the natural desires, ambitions, behaviors, giftedness that God gives us. We choose to exploit them beyond his intentions and rules, for lack of a better word. Demonic is when we deny those things. We're ingrates. We're now the inverse. We're the upside down. And like, for example, when I come home from work early and my son wasn't expecting me and I catch him having sex with his high school girlfriend, that is sin. Okay? They have these desires. They're natural for them to have them for one another. They're exploiting them before they're supposed to. That's sinful. All right? Now I come home from work and my son is in the basement and doesn't even ask a girl out because he's not sure he can handle it and he can handle rejection. That's demonic. I'm now taking those desires and instincts and I'm refusing them. All right? I'm moving the opposite polarity. I'm not moving outside of not exploiting God's rules. I'm saying I'm not even within those rules. I'm in a totally different ecosystem in a different realm. What are your thoughts on that in about a minute and a half?
That's really fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. There's a distinct, I think that you could get
like, well, are you saying like sin is the twisting of nature?
Yes.
Demonic
is the denial of it. Yes.
Is the denial of it.
And it's the resetting of it. It's a different nature. It's a different kingdom. It's a different realm. Yeah.
And I would even see a continuation of that same thing. I've talked about this in sermons and things before, and I think maybe on Haunted Cosmos as well. But you see in the demonic, I mentioned it a minute ago, they hate God. They hate God's image, so they're going to hate God everywhere they see him, especially in the face of man. And this, to me, is one of the only explanations, really, for something as crazy as transing kids.
Yes, exact. That's a perfect example. Yes.
We're going so far contrary to nature now that we are actually butchering our own children. We're doing things that are so contrary to even the warped by sin human instincts of maternal and paternal instincts that I'm now actually saying, yeah, I'm going to chemically castrate my child. I'm going to chop off part of their arm skin and I'm going to make a fake phallus for them.
Yeah.
That is explicable. I mean, certainly human sin is deeply involved.
Like, I'm a big total depravity guy. I've even got my Catholic my Catholic assistant over here is even agreeing with me on total depravity these days. Okay, but total depravity is not utter depravity. Those are different things.
Right. Exactly.
Utter is irredeemable. Right. Okay.
Right.
What you're describing, I'm willing to do that. Even J.R. Ewing loved John Ross Jr. Guys. Okay. What you're describing, we're doing to our own children. Those are acts of like utter depravity. Like I'm in total denial of whose image I am made. In fact, I'm ashamed of it, and I want to undo it. All right.
Yes.
When we come back, I want to get into the episodes themselves and maybe some of the things that creeped them out as well as me. We'll do that when we return. All right, back here with Hour 2 here on Blaze TV radio and podcast. Special evergreen edition of the Steve Deace Show. Let us know what you think about what we think via the stevedeace.com inbox. You can email us, steve@stevedeace.com, DEACE. Like us on Facebook, MeWe, and Gab. Follow me at Steve Deace Show on Twitter, Getter, Instagram, and TikTok. And then if you like the show, please leave us a 5-star review. If you don't like the show, of course, we would not ask you to lie. If you kind of like the show, though, we would totally ask you to exaggerate, okay? So even if you're just kind of, it's okay, 5-star review. We only want 1 in 5-star reviews. That's what we're going for here, and we appreciate each and every one of those. Hit subscribe on your podcast feed of choice, or if you're on iTunes, it's follow. That way, every time we do a new episode, it will show up in your podcast feed every single time, and that way you won't miss a single one, because why would you want to do that? You also do not want to miss a single episode of the podcast that we are featuring on today's Evergreen, the Haunted Cosmos podcast. However, before we continue on with that, I know a lot of you keep asking more and more, hey, what can I do to fight back? Well, one thing you can do is you put your retirement dollars to work as a weapon against the spirit of the age. And Constitution Wealth can help you do that, help you build your financial fortress, helping you defend your values with every one of your dollars. You can secure your family's future with a rock-solid investment investment plan that reduces the grip that ESG, DEI, and other woke schemes have on your investments. You can fight the culture war with maybe the most powerful weapon of all, your very investments, and build the parallel economy by working with an investment firm that shares your values at the same time. So take action now. Visit constitutionwealth.com/blaze and sign up for a free consultation today. All right, free consultation today at constitutionwealth.com/blaze. Again, head over there right now for a free consultation at constitutionwealth.com/blaze. And I am bound and determined, I'm going to get these guys' names completely right this time. You'd think I'd know them by heart. I've only listened to over 100 hours of this show in the last 3 months. Okay. Ben Garrett, Brian Sauvé, third time's the charm. All right. They are here. They are the masterminds behind this. It's entertaining, it's interesting, it's compelling. I mean, I just couldn't recommend it more highly. And it's called the Haunted Cosmos Podcast, and it's looking at supernatural, paranormal phenomenon from an explicitly biblical point of view and worldview. So we've talked about you guys' backgrounds, some of your theological challenges putting this together, the construction of the show itself, some of the broader worldview conflicts and themes within doing the show, and then what content to present. I want to get into some of the specific episodes themselves. Okay. And,
excellent.
And a couple of episodes in particular. And again, like I told you guys earlier, I watched all this stuff growing up, man. I don't get scared by much. Okay. I mean, at 4 years old, I was scared of everything. By 14, I'm like, they just removed somebody's head, I'm good. I mean, my grandmother made sure I saw it all. I didn't care. All right. So there have been a couple of episodes. I found them all compelling. Okay. And did you guys do a good job with atmospherics? If you're a parent who doesn't want to scare your teenager or draw them into the darkness, I would not describe this as horror in its content. I should probably make that clear.
Right.
There is certainly, when you're dealing with spiritual darkness, there is an ominous to it, maybe is the best way that I would describe it. Okay. But there's no intent to have your kid, buying Michael Myers gear with any of this stuff. So don't worry about that. Okay.
Amen.
But
in fact, don't.
Yes. Yeah. Even if they were, don't do it anyway. Exactly. Yeah. But there have been a couple of episodes where the presentation itself and how real it came across, the idea that you guys had maybe discovered something truly evil, not maybe mythically evil or atmospherically evil or interpreted as evil, but literal manifested evil, is the Black-Eyed Children episode. And the one I just listened to, actually, about the Sally House. Okay?
Yeah.
And so let's start with those two, because they're first on my mind of many others. But what exactly is a black-eyed child? What is that?
That is a good question.
That is the question. Because there was a phenomenon that occurred it began really to hit the mainstream in terms of pop culture, early internet virality, even in the 90s.
Yeah, but the story was like 60s or 70s. Well, but then he posted it on 4chan or something.
Oh, I thought it happened in the 90s.
Maybe.
It could be. Anyways, it was in the early
60s,
internet.
90s, what's the difference?
A gentleman posted about this encounter that he had with these two children when he was trying to basically pay for a bill at a movie theater. There was like a mail slot right next to it. And these children approached and they were asking him for a ride in his car. And it was just bizarre. And at some point in the interaction, he realized, oh, like this visceral feeling of fear I have, this like soul level fear, is justified. These kids' eyes are completely black.
Yeah.
And they're trying to get in his car, and it's like this whole threshold motif that you see in vampirism and all this other stuff. Like,
they have to be invited in.
Let me in. And if he had let them in, what would they have done? Well, and then we see an explosion of stories across the world of people claiming similar encounters. And but with very similar themes.
Yeah, the clothes are always a little bit off. They're a little old. The kids don't have parents. They seem like uncanny valley. They're not, and not just in the eyes, but in the voice, and they're just not quite human. They're not quite children. And then it's always like they notice the eyes halfway into the
partway through.
It's not right away, but later on they see like, oh, this kid has no eye.
And there are stories of people who let them in and then were afflicted with terminal cancer.
Yeah.
And interestingly, you can actually find a similar phenomena across mythology of children type spirits or things pretending to be children to lure you into the woods, or the mealing, or
it's very changeling-esque.
Yes, a changeling type story.
The fairies, they take this real human child and they present this faux fairy child in its place, and the fairy child is actually never quite right. It never quite gets it.
It's just really creepy.
It's really creepy. That was the only episode where writing it scared me. Because I was in the church basement. I was the last one there.
Yep.
All the lights were off. I was listening to, Dracula's Library, whatever, on YouTube playlist. And my back was to the door, and I'm writing about one of the stories, and I'm just like, what am I doing?
He keeps looking over his shoulder. Are the black-eyed children here for me? We're like, and here's the thing, guys. If
then there's a knock at the door.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was like, there's so many windows. I'm going to hear a knock.
What you need to do, if they come to your door, is you go, say Christ is Lord, you may not come in, and then close the door. That's what you do.
God help you. Close the door.
All right.
Probably demons.
The Sally house. Well, we'll get to the probably demons trope, and you guys need to develop an entire line of swag. It's probably demons, okay? But because I was telling when I was educating Todd on your show, getting ready for you guys coming on today, I mentioned at the end of every episode the answer is it's probably demons. That's pretty much the answer every episode. But the Sally house, and how I actually went and watched the sightings episode on YouTube that you guys reference in the in the production in preparation for this discussion. As maybe the most documented case of actual paranormal activity, maybe in like American history, given we didn't have technology for this, 50, 60, 70, or 100 years ago like we do to capture this kind of stuff nowadays. So what is the Sally house?
The Sally house, the house in Atchison, Kansas, and it has experienced an intense amount of haunting type phenomena. Particularly with one family that lived there for a time with their young infant child. But then later, even it's since become managed by the city of Atchison, actually, as a haunted tourism location where people go and they attempt to contact the entity or entities there with EVPs, electronic voice phenomena. And it's one of those stories that when I heard the story initially years ago, from a different podcast called Astonishing Legends, and not a Christian, but Scott and Forrest.
Good podcast.
Great podcast. They actually went there, and they were there to speak at an Amelia Earhart convention, because that's her hometown, I think.
Yes. Her house is actually really close to the Sally house. Also haunted.
Also haunted, supposedly.
Yeah.
But when they were there, they got an EVP that is horrifying.
Yeah.
Just this demonic, multi-minute, guttural growling that they had forensic audiologists look at, couldn't explain. So there are literally hundreds of EVPs from this house. The family that lived there, the Pickmans, on camera, you can watch. They have a continuous 9-minute shot at one point where he's being scratched by something invisible, and horrifying encounters.
His shirt catches on fire
all the time.
The Raggedy Ann doll on the stairs, it just catches on fire, and it's a Christmas party. There's dozens of people around, and all of a sudden it's just poof, and no one was there. And there's like, they left out a piece of construction paper with a crayon, and they asked Sally, "Hey Sally, please tell us how old you are." And a few days later they come in, and there's this like 7 scrawled across the paper in the crayon. They gave Sally a gift, and then they got discouraged because she didn't open it. And so after a couple weeks, they opened it and realized that even though the wrapping was still there and the box was untainted, the item wasn't inside anymore. And then they found it in the closet. Like, there's all
the cell phone.
The cell phone.
Later, they had a cell phone, one of those brick phones, and it went missing.
Yeah.
But then the phone would occasionally text them.
Yeah.
Strange, garbled characters that weren't even in the program of the phone, like weird pictographic.
And all of it was captured by 4 visits of the sightings crew.
The television show.
And literally all of them, the host, who was himself a skeptic, the cameramen, the mediums they brought in, the paranormal investigators they brought in.
The necromancer they brought in.
Yeah, all of it. Well, yeah, I repeat
the
myself.
Psychic, the necromancer.
All of them to a man were like, no, this is messed up. there's definitely something going on.
And this is happening on this episode's is 30 years old. So
Yes,
the idea that the technology did not exist to create this kind of stuff in real time, like you might be able to do things like this with some of even, it'd be expensive, but some of the technology available to people nowadays. 30 years ago, there's no way you could have done this on a remote location. I mean, you would have needed a movie crew to shoot a green screen and then do this in post-production to recreate this in real time.
Oh, yeah.
And since then, there's been, before the city of Atchison came in to manage it, the original owner was still renting it out to people after the Pickmans moved out. And there was one woman who was in the basement, and she's, allegedly put a pentagram on the floor.
Drew a sigil
and was doing satanic magic rituals and things like that.
And what's again back to sort of so we interact with stories like this on an episode, and then we're asking like what's going on here? Why do we care about it? And one of the through lines you find in haunting stories like this that I think is fascinating is this line of deception where the entity that's there, I think is irrefutably real. That there's something truly supernatural going on in this and other houses like this and places. But what it does is so nefarious in that it will essentially work very hard to trick people into adopting a worldview where there is supernaturality to it, but it's like anything but the Christian faith.
See, that's what stuck out to me about your episode, because and it's also why I brought up Paranormal Activity earlier. Because I'm listening to this and I'm like, I've seen this trope before. Let's bring in the psychic. Let's bring in the necromancer. Let's bring in the scientific skeptic community and have them film it. Okay, all right.
Yep.
Who wasn't brought in here? It's Kansas. I know there's churches there.
Oh yeah.
Who wasn't brought in here? And again, that's what stuck out to me is you're actually now fueling the demonic energy and the deception that's taking place there by leaning into it and playing into it.
There's kind of I think two plots to that. One of them is really cynical to me. It's the when Paul is annoyed by the demon that is doing fortune telling, and he casts it out, and the owners are really mad that he got rid of the demon because they were making income.
Money. Yeah.
So I think that the owners of these kinds of places, they're like, don't let anybody get rid of the demon. We need the demons are business.
Right.
But the other thing I think I see a lot in these stories, and Sally House is one of them, is it's this very, very subtly nefarious idea that the human spirit continues into an afterlife, but it's a type of afterlife that if it's true, Christianity can't be true.
Right.
That's the part that, and it's very subtle. They don't come out, and there are haunting stories from pre-technological, like in the early Americas, where
if I'm a dead spirit and I'm lingering on the mortal plane, then there's maybe not an eternity then at that from that perspective.
And you do see the shift, because earlier ghost stories, the ghosts would argue Christian doctrine.
Yeah.
And they would overtly try to undermine Christian faith positively, but now I think they do it deceptively.
The Bell Witch.
The Bell Witch is what I was thinking about.
So the Bell Witch was this insane story that took place in Tennessee, and this household ghost who they named the Bell Witch because it was the Bell family. She would argue with all of the clergymen who came into the house to try to exorcise her. And she would, correct them on doctrine. She would correct them on which translation they were citing from a certain scripture. And the whole point was that everyone left feeling like doubt.
The clergy are dumb. Don't listen to them.
The clergy themselves were like, maybe I'm just wrong.
Maybe I'm dumb. And now they do it through, let's just introduce this subtle idea of afterlife without Christ, life without Christ.
Or just this idea that
Christianity's not true.
Death is nothing to fear. Death is actually it's always been there. It's always been very natural, and it's actually good for everybody, no exceptions. Yeah. Graham Hancock is a great example of this. Mm-hmm. He was raised Christian. He has apostatized, and he's taken up ayahuasca. And he's one of the few people that's actually closer to the truth on the fact that the supernatural realm is there. The problem is that he takes ayahuasca, so he's communed with the spirit of ayahuasca multiple times, and he's walked away from it saying, you know what? Every religion is okay. Except Christianity. They're horrible.
It's so funny because it's so obvious to us. We look at that and go, of course, the message from the demon is going to be, oh yeah, Buddhism, no big deal. Hinduism, whatever suits you. Just don't be a Christian. They're bigots.
Don't worry about dying.
They really suck.
It'd be great if you died.
Yeah.
The demons are just telling us it'd be great if we died, and we're like, yeah, fine, hook, line, and sinker.
Great, I'll just die.
How dumb can we get?
I have noted to this audience in the past, the only two organizations I know of on this planet that people actively seek to join while not adopting their central tenets are the Christian Church and the Republican Party. I don't know of any other two organizations in the world. Hey, you know what, man? I'm a Confucian, and I'm going to come and teach them that Vishnu's God. Then why don't you just go be a Hindu? You know, I mean, they're the only two organizations in the world. I'm a Christian and a Republican, and that's exactly why I'm going to deny the central tenets of what's in their scriptures and in the party platform. Anyway,
Yep, that's funny.
Before we conclude here, has there been a moment that you guys, when you got done, you had to say to yourselves, did we go too far there? Let's go back and make sure there's more light there. Let's go back and make sure more of the gospel is proclaimed over this here, that maybe it's aired on the side of the sensational aspect of the content and not of the sovereignty of God. Have you ever had to do that before?
You know, one of the things we try to do a lot, and I think this gets missed, is that we do try to make a clear distinction as we're going through these various topics between what we know, what we think, and what we're just wildly speculating about. Mm-hmm. So that does help protect my conscience, at least as we're going through. We're trying to be clear, like, hey, we have no verse on this.
Yeah.
We're actually just speculating here. But we do, I think there have been times where at least I've walked away and thought, okay, let's make sure extra careful that we go hard in this next episode or at the end of this episode on, we don't tell you this to scare you. We tell you this because Christ is Lord over that, and you need to turn to him and be safe. I think that you know, Brian and I are both ministers, and so there's part of it that's like, as a minister and an aspiring minister, of course I want the light of the gospel to be the thing that is most permeating. But I've never walked away thinking I didn't do a good enough job of proclaiming the light. I have had people tell me that I've done a bad job. Oh, sure, yeah, plenty all the time.
But
we get lots of emails.
I have I've disagreed with them every time.
You don't get to the top 10 religion and spirituality chart without getting a lot of emails of people who really don't like you.
Yes.
For all kinds.
In fact, I'm sure you know.
We got
I've got a little experience with this.
Yeah, like,
yes.
We got more emails than anything about when we said that BLM was not good.
Oh yeah, the BLM was demonic.
Just in passing. We were like, oh yeah, and this is almost as dumb as like BLM marches, and we got a lot of emails about that.
The sleep paralysis, I think the sleep paralysis episode from season 1 remains the one that people were the most not upset with, but the most concerned about. You know, we got the concern bro email quite a few times about that one, and
people are going to get sleep paralysis from listening to this. I'm like, that's not how it works.
That's not how it works. And I mean, I didn't get it, and I wrote the whole thing.
It's not. You don't get cooties.
But no, I think some of it's a dispositional thing. Some people are going to be more like they're going to be more scared than others. But with my own conscience now, I haven't had a problem.
Yeah, my kids listen to it.
Yeah,
that was the question I was going to ask. How young of kids would you be comfortable listening to this?
I think so. My kids, the ones that pay attention, they're like 6 and up. I have kids ranging from 11 on down to 1. I have 6 kids, and they all enjoy it, listen to it. We'll talk about it, and I kind of take that perspective where we would encourage parents with anything to say, like, my goal isn't to, I'm going to read my kids books that are only the ones that say 8 and below. No, I'm going to read them Tolkien when they're 5. When they're 5, and they won't get all of it, but we're going to have really good conversations, and that's what's happened. None of them have been like so scared of Bigfoot in the woods now or something like, because the theme that we're always bringing back is, You're kids, you're Christians. Yeah, it's a Christian home. The Lord is on our side.
What's the word? Twaddle?
Twaddle.
Yeah, you don't want to use
Charlotte Mason word.
Yeah, you don't want to just give your kids the My First Book. You want to give them rich food that they can grow into. Mm-hmm. That's why you read in the scriptures
Oh man,
like from the day they're born, you know.
If you think our show has dark stuff in it, like read
Oh,
Ezekiel.
I know. We say on our show all the time, the Bible, by some people's standards today, would be a rated R book given some of the subject matter in there, for sure.
Well, it's like
The first 10 chapters.
Yes.
Andy Wilson.
My son-in-law, as he started growing in his faith after when him and my daughter started to date, and they do their first Bible study together, and he's at work, and he's a soldier, okay, and he's been to Iraq a couple times. He's seen things, okay. He gets through the first 10, 12 chapters of Genesis. He calls her at work, my daughter, and he's from work. He goes, "What is this? I've never seen anything like this. It's like a reality show. This guy's sleeping with his hooker daughter. What is going on here?" Okay, he's like, this is not what I was told this was. And if I knew this is what it was, I'd have started reading this a long time ago. This is way more interesting than what I was sold. Okay,
just wait till the end of Judges.
Yes.
I love Andy Wilson says the world is rated R and no one's checking IDs.
Yeah.
So we're not trying to raise kids to be scared of the darkness. We're trying to send our kids out to be light that pollutes the darkness and makes it light.
Yeah.
Amen.
Like that's what I want my kids to be.
My oldest is 3. You know, he's not so he doesn't really listen to Hana Cosmos because he doesn't want to. But you know, at night
it's a discriminating taste. Yes.
Yes.
You know, there's been the whole like, Dad, like I'm afraid of that shadow on the wall, and I'm like, yeah, okay. But you know, you can ask God to send his angels to protect you, and he'll send his angels to protect you. It's not that there's nothing there. Like there are things that are dangerous for my son.
Yeah.
But the thing is the one that he serves, the one that he belongs to, is the thing that they're all afraid of. He belongs to God, and all the demons flee from him, and they shudder at his proclamation of Lord. So it's not like, hey, just try to ignore it and pretend it doesn't exist. No, it does.
Yeah.
And it does deserve your respect. You shouldn't just flippantly, treat it like it's nothing, but pray and ask the Lord to send his angels to protect you, and he will do that.
Do you ever tell him see our published works?
No,
Ben, I'm going to steal that. Okay.
Okay. Good.
The part that you just said there is, it's not that there's nothing there to be afraid of. It's that who you believe in is what they're all afraid of.
Yes.
That is gold, Jerry. All right. That'll preach right there. That is very well said.
Oh, good.
All right. I've got 5 minutes left. Okay, with you guys. Quick time out here, though, because a lot of our kids are heading back to school here this week. There's a new great learning opportunity. It's from our friends at Hillsdale. I mean, I know you guys, if you're tuned into the Blaze, you're already one of the most informed audiences out there, but you could always get more good content. And that's what you have right there with the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. From the Larry Arnn Show to the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour, their online courses podcast, they're all top-notch. You can find them on all the major podcast platforms out there. And Hillsdale College's Podcast Network, just one of the many ways they're defending liberty on the battlefield of education, and that's why they've got millions of downloads as well. So find your new second favorite, next to us, we hope anyway, your new second favorite podcast today on the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. You're going to find it at daceforhillsdale.com, F-O-R, daceforhillsdale.com. Again, head over to daceforhillsdale.com. Let's go into the future. I mean, you guys are towards the end of season 3, I believe, at the time we are taping this. Do you have a plan? Are you guys like the writers of Lost, where you weren't sure what was going to happen and you got into season 2 and you're like, oh, we're screwed. ABC just ordered 5 more seasons.
I guess kind of.
And so there's like the first season is a masterpiece. The next few are like, what is this? And then the last 2 seasons are great again. Okay. And so do you guys have a plan, an arc for how long this can go on? And is there something you haven't tackled yet, which maybe by the time this airs you will have, but you haven't yet because you're afraid, maybe afraid's not the right word, you're unsure of particularly what is the biblical lens to apply to this yet?
Well, so it's for the future. When we started, when we sat down at the Chili's restaurant in Orlando,
Florida, with our El Presidente margaritas.
we were sketching out the first episode in the first seasons. We immediately, just within a 5-minute period, had a list of 60 plus topics.
Oh, wow.
That we would like to. So our list remains huge and growing because the world is full of interesting stories. And because the early seasons may be deceptive in that we've tried to do a lot of let's give a big bucket episode on something like ghosts.
Yeah.
Do we give our meta theory? And then later we can go back like we've done with Sally House and give a particular instance and dissect it a little bit more deeply. So we'll be doing a lot of that. We are currently almost finished writing a book.
Yes.
That is called Haunted Cosmos: Doing Your Duty in
a World That's Not Just Stuff.
Boom. And it's a lot about our, not so much like a bunch of scary stories as it is about this. The world is not this materialist world, and it's also not that crazy spiritual free-for-all. The Lord made it all, and you should worship him. That's kind of the book, how to live in God's world well. There have been episodes, though, I think, and you could probably speak to this as well, that we've been chipping away at and know we're going to do one, but we know it's going to be a lot of work, like megaliths.
Yeah.
And some of these things where we can tell that there's something there, but we know we're going to have to read 10 books and think a lot about it. And then one day we'll be able to do the episode on it.
Right. Yeah. The future, if I were to answer the question, the book is a big thing. I think there will be more books that come out of Haunted Cosmos, even if it's just, here's what you should think as a Christian about magic and witchcraft. And it's 100-page, quick, here's theosophy. What should a Christian think about theosophy? And so I think that will come. Maybe live shows. We've
would
talked
like to
about
do that.
touring. Like, in a week we tour three to five cities in the Southeast, and we do the same show every night, but it's only they hear it. And we do a Q&A or something. I think that would be really fun.
And we just did that at our conference in Ogden here.
I think the main
it was
show,
so fun.
I mean, I think the main show can go on indefinitely. That's the thing.
There's so much to the world that God made that it's like,
and all of it's interesting.
And we're not only interested in doing supernatural, we also tell just what is an interesting story where there's some element of mystery or where it's like, what happened there?
Like the Dyatlov Pass episode that we did is an example of that. Mm-hmm. The episode that I want to do, but that I feel completely ill-equipped to do, is on mathematics and discerning between what is math that is good and what is math that is cursed and bad.
Like sacred geometry and some of these.
And why is it bad? And
I took a lot of cursed math in high school, and it reflected on my ACT score. I can promise you that, yes.
I just like, hey man, I love math. I think that most of our modern math is a technology that we've developed, but I think that there is something latent in the world that God made that is mathematics.
You guys,
and the curse touched it.
Pardon me. This has been incredible. I'd have been fine doing this for another 2 hours, but we are out of time. And I got to say, I keep being told you Reform guys are all joyless prudes, and all of you have like 50 kids, okay, and none of them were conceived immaculately, and you're doing shows about haunted houses. So I don't think that branding didn't live up to what I was sold on you guys either. So it's been great, guys. We would definitely love to have you back sometime, and I'll be listening for sure. It's fantastic work. Thank you.
Great. Appreciate it, Steve. Thank you so much.
You bet. It's called Haunted Cosmos. You do not want to miss it. I don't. I mean, I've listened to every episode I can get my hands on so far. We'll come back and talk about these guys behind their back next.
The Steve Deace Show.
All right, let's bring in the fellas here. Todd and Aaron, you guys have been dutifully paying attention to the last hour and a half as we've been talking to Ben Garrett and Brian Sauvé, who are the masterminds behind the fantastic Haunted Cosmos podcast. Aaron, I think it is only fair, because you are the muse for why this conversation ever took place in the first place and how I even heard about this podcast in the first place. It only is fair, therefore, to begin with you and your thoughts on the conversation we just had.
So I originally heard of Brian Sauvé just randomly on Twitter. Popped up in my feed on the For You page. That's the algorithm. It's not just the people I follow. Randomly popped up with an album that he had produced. And the way that he marketed it kind of caught my eye. It was worship music. That was, I can't remember if somebody else was describing it as masculine, because it's not the stuff we sing in our churches. And certainly the things that are on Christian radio are Jesus is my boyfriend type of music. So I gave it a listen, and it was musically rich, it was lyrically rich, and it was very, masculine, I would say. So I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. So I gave him a follow on Twitter. Started reading some of his opinions on things. He tweets posts on X quite frequently. And then I heard of this thing called Haunted Cosmos, and I started checking that out, and it just blew my mind. Because for somebody growing up like I did, and not a criticism, it's just a statement of fact, that things of the supernatural, if they're talked about at all, if they're mentioned at all, whether it's the Dyatlov Pass, what happened there, what was going on there. Skinwalker Ranch. Aliens, they were either frightening and or dismissed out of hand if they were talked about at all. Yet, as somebody who, when I got older and was less terrified of the notion of aliens and things like that, I listened to Coast AM almost every single night on WHO 1040, the same station you made your bones in politics here locally in Iowa. So I had an interest in these things. I made sure, though, protecting my own mind, my own soul, that it was not an outsized interest, but I found it fascinating, somewhere between amusing to fascinating to kooky, especially as you got later in the night and George Norrie started taking callers. That was kind of my experience with the subject matter. But then when you listen to Haunted Cosmos and you have this uncompromising theology, which both of those guys possess, and you heard some of that come out there, and the willingness and ability to explore some of these fascinating mysteries about the universe, that was just an amazing combination. And just the cherry on top, the production value of this is something that NPR, Serial, would be jealous of. It is that level of good. So I just found it fascinating. I found it really, really cool. But the more and more I started looking at Brian Sauvé, he's the pastor at Refuge Church, I believe, in Ogden, Utah, and seeing the well-ordered life that he not only lives himself, but he preaches to his church, and Ben as well, because he's part of that church. It really even lends itself even more credibility, that podcast. Because if it was just two schmucks who are generally Bible-based and trying to tie in theology with paranormal, that's cool in and of itself. But you look at the lives of these guys. I mean, Sauvé, he teaches his church you should not send your kids to government schools to be indoctrinated. But he doesn't just stop there. That's what their church teaches. They also have a school at their church that you can send your kids to as long as you're a member in good standing and you tithe to the church. When you talk about ordered affections or ordered loves like Ben Garrett was earlier in the show, that is living that to a T. You heard Pastor Brian say on multiple occasions, how do you live well? I think looking at that, that's a really good example. Things that even if you don't come out of maybe a Reformed tradition, things that you should emulate. So when it comes to Haunted Cosmos, it's a really fun podcast to listen to. You can re-listen to episodes too. They don't really go stale very fast. But the overarching mission is not just to titillate the senses. It's not just to be entertained. It is the glory of God. That is the starting and end point of that series. And glory to God in an area and with topics that are at the very least dismissed when you come out of kind of flyover country, generic evangelicalism, independent fundamentalism that are just kind of dismissed out of hand, sometimes with good reason, or at least stated good reason, but never really examined. They examine them for the glory of God. And that's, I don't know, to me, I find that really compelling. Maybe
Amen.
I'm just a nerd, though. So.
No, and you are correct. The best word I would use to describe their product is compelling. It is compelling. And that's a great compliment to give any kind of broadcast product. One final partner we've got to discuss, our friends over at Lassie. They're an absolute game changer when it comes to health coverage. Now, it's not health insurance, but it's access to the health care you want without all the red tape, restrictions, inflated costs. They've got coverage plans starting as low as $30 a month with that. Just their baseline plan. You get over 400 prescription medications for free, unlimited free virtual mental health counseling, free 24/7 virtual urgent care, lab test up to 60% off, imaging up to 75% off, and more. That's their basic package, folks, and it only goes up from there. There's no annual or lifetime caps on services. You can start a plan at any time as well. As you can see, Lassie Health is a game changer. Check out affordable plans that put you in control of your health care at healthylink.com/Steve. And for a limited time, get your first month for free. That's up to $100 off eligible plans. So get healthy, be healthy, and stay healthy without breaking the bank at healthylink.com/Steve. So, Todd, I would imagine you sitting there listening to these hyper-reformed guys for the last 90 minutes, you strangely found a lot of kinship probably in a lot of the themes they touched on and the subject and the way they chose to address and touch on them at the same time. So what were your thoughts in the conversation?
Well, I haven't seen an episode, and the little I know about them is from you two sharing, did you see that one last night? And then briefly beforehand, you just telling me a little bit about their reform background. But had you just said, I'm doing this interview, you know nothing about them, and had I known nothing, what would you guess, Catholic or Protestant? I would have said there's relatively high probability that they might be Catholic. Now, I'm sure once we start talking about other things, but just based within this context. And I'd be fascinated along those lines to have conversations because of several things he said. One, at the end, they want to do something on math, but before we do that, we're going to have to read like 10 books, and then we're really going to have to think about it. Like, it speaks to what you just said. They're not fly-by-night. Mm-hmm. They're sober about their analysis. And then when they talked about the knee-jerk reaction of these things these old stories from whatever, one of the reactions is always, oh, well, these are bumpkins, these are simpletons, and how dismissive they are of that, because there's a very Catholic quality to when they talked about how, isn't the motto of X-Files, the truth is out there?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, when they were talking about Scripture, and they basically were reminding people, and I'm paraphrasing what they said, but they were like, life is out there. And that very much speaks to the Catholic notion of the sacramental economy. Most of human history, for reasons that are understandable and have nothing to do with the man holding us down, people could not sit down and read a Bible. And even after there was a Bible to be read, largely because of, just again, the historical accident of the printing press coming into line, a lot of people still couldn't read. The sacramental economy was an understanding of the nature of man, the nature of reality, how we relate. Mind, body, and soul. And I think this is one of the pitfalls of the modern day notion. Reading the Bible by definition, and you don't need to pull back a single bit from believing that is the most important document we have, and it is Holy Writ. But it's passive. Sitting down and reading is passive. And I think there's a tendency to then not realize that is a prescription for living. And that seems to come out in a lot of the debates between different tribes within Protestantism, and then Protestantism, Orthodox Protestantism in general, and Catholicism. And these guys are honestly drunk in the best possible way of believing that your life is worked out there, and so-called orthodox biblical notions of why this kind of stuff that they talk about is verboten, nonsensical. They absolutely and unapologetically turn it on its head. They seem to not even leave that as an opinion worth having, which I find absolutely fascinating from, again, Orthodox little o perspective. And it's something, again, it's a Catholic sensibility to me. And if you build on that in the big O sense, the high church sense, you get to a sacramental economy. And the height of it is transubstantiation. That's body, blood, soul, and divinity within bread and wine. I mean, talk about a haunted cosmos on that subject. I'd be interested to see them take something like that up, because they fundamentally believe that, and they going back to the creation. It is this whole thing. It's a cathedral given to us to live in. We are made in the image and likeness of God, and we all seem as Christians to run away from that and hide. And said, at the end, I can't remember the way he put it, but he's like, I'm raising my children to understand this so they can basically be the antidote to the darkness. I'm paraphrasing slightly.
Polluting the darkness.
Polluting the darkness. Yeah, that they're out there. They're in the game. It's not just a thought thing. It's not just an assent. It's not something we just meditate. We get out in it. We wrestle with it. Where have we heard that before?
That would be fascinating to see them tackle some of those things that you mentioned, for sure, because of the obvious supernatural implications to what those things mean, and then how do those things line up with doctrine in the scriptures, etc. Which brings me to this point I think we should make. Again, we're taping this on June 26th of 2024. We have no idea when it's eventually going to air. But at the time we're taping this, there has been a lot of conversation about cessationism on the show this year, going back to our very first evergreen that we did with Greg Locke, and then conversations we had as we opened the first chapter of Romans in our Bible study there. And in response to you and I's pushback to cessationism, Todd, one thing it's been cessationists, we can't put them all in a group either any more than we can put virtually anybody in a group. Okay. So there is what you're hearing from these guys, because the cessationists who pushed back on us, the thing they all had in common, the ones that pushed back on us. I mean, there were several who emailed me and said, "Yeah, you guys pretty much nailed it. We think you're all cooks." But there was another group of cessationists who pushed back on us in that you guys are misrepresenting what we really think. We do not deny that there is spiritual warfare. We do not deny that the supernatural exists. We don't deny those things. What we're saying is, we don't believe individuals anymore are called to the position of apostle or prophet. Okay, that it's the ecclesiastical, like I always say when we talk about the debates between Catholics and Protestants, everybody thinks we're debating theology. We're not. We're debating ecclesiology. Okay, because you have an authority structure that teaches you what something means, and I have an authority structure that teaches me what it does or doesn't mean, and that's where the conflict is. The conflict is with the authority structure, not with the theology. The theology is emanating mostly from the authority structure, right? And that's what they would say is that we think what ceased is these specific ecclesiastical authorities given to individuals. Okay, that they're Prophet John in your Pentecostal church. He may even have a prophetic gift, but he's not Prophet John. Okay, we have a prophet. It's called the Holy Spirit, and he can prophesy through absolutely anybody and any of us in and of himself whenever he wants. Okay, and Apostle John in your Pentecostal church, he may even have an apostolic gift, but he's not Apostle John because nobody has those titles anymore. Okay, because the Holy Spirit can give an apostolic gift to everybody and anybody whenever it wants in this era compared to the previous era of the church. See what is that an accurate portrayal of another view of this, Aaron?
So, yeah.
These guys seem to me like they represent that viewpoint on this. Fair?
Yeah.
And I just thought that we should make note of that given the amount of discussion we've had about this topic all throughout the course of the year, that there's nuanced views even within, the other sides of this debate that should be heard and respected. All right, we've got about a minute left. Was there anything in here that really surprised you?
Not necessarily. I mean, I've been following them for a while now. So there's a lot of things that, there are a lot of things that that were said that kind of, I jived with or didn't really surprise me. I think at the end of the day, we have to remind ourselves when it comes to this topic specifically the supernatural, we kind of set up the conversation like this, and I think it's a good place to close, is, you cannot overemphasize it to where it becomes all-encompassing, but it would be very, very dangerous to completely minimize that. And I think they do a good job of drawing that distinction and drawing that contrast, I think, on this program. It cannot be your first love, just like lightsabers or football or whatever cannot be your first love. It's okay to have a toe in every now and then, just don't go all the way up to your neck in it.
I would love to close with what Ben said. This is going to stick with me. Every bit as much as what John Daniel Davidson said about America won't cease, it'll just become evil. There are things from the unseen realm that you should be afraid of, but they're all afraid of the God that we represent. I thought that was cash money. We'll leave you with that. Romans 8:28.